Dermot, first of all, just tell us how you ended up in the glass factory. So go back to your childhood, where you went to primary school. Did you go to secondary school?
No. Very briefly, I went to the secondary school in Mount Sion, but I exited through an open window, and I went on the duck for 3 weeks, and I got caught after 3 weeks, and I told my mother I wouldn't go back to Mount Sion. I was terrified, Ollie. I was sure of one thing every day, and that was at some stage I got a beating. Not off the boys, off the teachers, the masters. Well, anyway, I went down to the tech, and I went from being the bottom of the class in Mount Sion to the top of the class in the tech. So that's honest to God. And one day then, my father said to me, I don't know whether I was still in the tech or I had finished in the tech, and he said to me, right, boy, time for you to go to work. And he brought me down to the mansion house to meet a cousin of his, the famous Sandy White. Annie the Glass Factory lads will tell you, Sandy was a brilliant character. And he was also a shop steward in the early days. But he was an absolutely brilliant character, great character, Sandy. So he said to me, where do you want to go? So I knew none. I said, you decide. So he put me into the cutting. And I eventually ended up in what was called the flat cutting, but the name for the Rhine tour. I loved it there. I loved it. The camaraderie. It was completely. The wedge cutting were more strict, more severe. All the qualified guys. Well, everybody wore ties, which I thought was very dangerous. They'd wear a collar and tie going to work because you had a spindle flying either from you or towards you, and if your tie caught in that, you were in trouble. But we didn't wear ties. We were like the hippie version of the cutters. And we used to sing a song. We'd be singing all day. Myself and Frankie McAvoy, who eventually ended up in Simon's protege with me. And we'd be singing all day. And everybody in the flat cotton would be singing. It was a great place to work.
And do you remember your first day?
I do. My first day, I went into the glass factory. I remember my mother had me dressed up like, as they say, a Burton's dummy. And I remember what I was wearing. A tan brush nylon, that's what my mother described, brush nylon shirt. And kind of, as she'd say, a cavalry twill, kind of a fawn, kind of like, they might call them something on the side of chinos now. And so I went down anyway, and Don Walker, and Don, good friend of mine, Don brought me in, got a milk bottle, which was the old glass milk bottles, and that's how he started to show me how to cut on a glass milk bottle. I'm sure some of the other lads tell you about that. No, but there was a glass milk bottle, and that's how they taught. And Don was the first fella, a lovely fella. And I always remember he looked like Cliff Richard, very, very good-looking guy, Don. And he showed me how to cut.
And then, take to it, like?
What's that?
Did you take to it?
Not to the wedge cutting. I eventually went into the flat cutting, and I took to that. I enjoyed the flat cutting. And I think the reason, it wasn't to do with the skill, it was who I was working with. Don was only part of the bench, but one of the senior cutters there didn't like me for some reason, and gave me a hard time, and that wasn't anything unusual. A lot of the poor young fellas were sacked because they weren't liked, not because they couldn't cut. You know, other people will tell you that. You talk to Ann Croak, and she'll tell you exactly the same, and she knew lots of fellas that, you know, were sacked because they weren't like, wrong colour eyes, wrong colour hair, whatever. They went. And that went through the whole factory, Ollie. But I got on extremely well in the flat cutting. And at some stage, and I can't remember, and I'm surprised I can't remember, that I got involved in the union. And I absolutely adored the union. And there was a group of us there. And prior to the 1970s, the shop stewards came from the master cutters. And they were always the shop stewards. But we challenged that back there in the late 60s. And so we put ourselves forward. And it was unheard of that apprentices would put themselves forward to be a shop steward, to represent. And we won. We became shop stewards, you know. And I remember at the time that there was what was called a house committee. And they would meet senior management, like Noel Griffin, Colin O'Connor and all those, Tom Healy. And they would meet, and I'm not sure if Anthony Brophy might have been there. I'm not sure about Owen Keeley. Perhaps Keeley was there too. Well, anyway, as I said, it was the top management level were there with this. But 32 fellas in a room, and a lot of them just wanting to hear the sound of the voice. We'd be up in, of course, the boardroom. And we had fellas shooting off of the mouth all over the place, and you tried to kick them under the table to shut up, you see. So I think it was Declan Chase that came up with the idea, we better rationalise this. And we decided to have one person representing one particular, from the witch cutting, from the flat cutting, from the blower, from the general. And we brought it down to a little group, a working group of 9 people. So from 32 down to 9. But by God, was it efficient? It was unbelievably efficient. And we would have, if we were having a management meeting the next day with the branch, as we call it, that became the branch committee, we would meet the night before and talk about tactics, what we wanted, what was the maximum, what was the minimum. And it was that technical. And we did that, and we met. And most of us would have belonged to what was called the Socialist Workers' Movement. And so we actually...
Say most of us is the young lads.
Young lads, yeah. But I will have to say, I'll have to mention 2 people, Ollie, that were shop stewards. And they would have been, older at the time, and they would have been senior craftsmen. In the wedge cutting, Dixie Power, and in the blown room, Shawnee Cuddy. Now, for me, they were unbelievable. They were brilliant trade unionists, but a stabilising, they'd say to you, lads, you haven't a chance getting that. Don't do that. Don't put it that way. They were very, 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 they taught us, they brought us along. They never said anything about young social, never, ever, ever. But they would always advise us as what to do, how to go, because they themselves were also involved in the committees, and Dixie was the senior steward over all the factory. Shawnee was the senior steward in the blown room. Absolutely brilliant. Unfortunately, Dixie died a few years ago, and I only met Shawnee Cuddy, and I loved meeting Shawnee. And he was absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. But on we went, and we, as I said, I eventually then, down in the flat cotton, as I said, it was almost like kind of a hippie type area, you know what I mean? Like we were very jolly down there, and we earned good money. So I decided, there was fellas, young fellas, the place was getting bigger and bigger, K1, K2, K3, K4, and it was getting bigger, and it was getting a little bit unwieldy. And I remember Noel Griffin, the managing director of the glass factory, said to me, Dermot, he said, I'm sorry that I made K1 to K3 and 4. If I had my way again, I would put it in different areas. And he was right to a degree. It was becoming a little bit unmanageable, because all these hundreds, nearly 1,000 young fellas, all young, good money, coming in the morning time, full of drink and everything. So, but having said that, they worked very, very hard. All the workers, all the craft workers in Waterford Crystal, it was piece rate, and you work for it. And I'll tell you how hard they worked. When eventually all the cutters began to develop these stress fractures and repetitive injuries, repetitive strain injuries in their arms, in their wrists, in the back, in their necks. So we got a guy over from, I can't remember, I think it would have been Norwich University. He came over, and I was branch chairman at that stage. So it was my job to show him around, and I brought him around down to the flat cutting, and Sean Tracy was cutting a ship's decanter. And down in the flat cutting, when we were cutting a ship's decanter, we had sort of like an L shape of a piece of metal with some sponge on it to give us extra leverage when you're cutting the ship's decanter. You would have to close one eye and you'd be cutting the neck of it. You have to look through the cutting, extremely difficult, look through it and then cut like that. But this L thing gave him extra leverage. So he went up to Sean, he said, do you mind, he said, if you're cutting away that I can touch your leg and your back and your neck? Sean said, no problem. So he did. And I see him shaking his head, and he turned around and he said to me, he said, are there many instances of heart attacks here? Excuse me. And I said, I started burst out laughing. I was only a young fella, knew no different. I said, he's probably one of the oldest fellas in the factory. The average age is probably 21. I never, Ollie, asked him, what did he see in that job? And very soon and very quickly, I was gone out of the factory. I left in 1982. Bang, 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 bang. Fellas dropping dead of heart attacks. You had Shammy Power, Bo McGrath. I don't want to say any more names in case I say the wrong name. Fellas might be still alive. But bang, bang, they start dropping. dropping dead from heart attacks, all in the 40s. So I don't know what he saw in the job. But I do know that a lot of fellas, a lot of colours still bear to the present day all the hard work. He told me that day, that professor guy, he said, I've never seen anybody work as hard in my life. He said, I've been down mines, he said, nothing compares to this. And that's why I always support the glass factory workers when people say they were too highly paid. No, they weren't too highly paid. They worked damn hard. They worked too hard. A lot of them, you know. And I mean, the wedge cutters were, as I said, like that. They worked extremely hard, you know.
Just go back on a couple of things you said there. When you started first, were you in Johnstown?
I started in Johnstown.
Okay.
And when they opened up, I was probably one of the first to go out to Kilbarry, you know. But, yeah.
What was Johnstown like in comparison to Kilbarry?
Well, there's no real difference. There was no real... And we went out and it was just a big hollow sound. When you turn on the wheels, you could hear it kind of echoing all over the place, you know. But the screeching, Ollie, when you're out there, if you're out for any reason, if you're out sick, when you go back in, the first thing that hits you is the high level of the noise of the cutting wheels screeching on the glass. That's all you'd hear, you know. And you'd eventually kind of have to try and you get so used to it, you know. But...
And sorry, the other thing I was going to ask you too, but where did you think your own interest in, say, trade unions and all that, where did that come from?
Well, I never knew, and I often wondered why. And quite recently I discovered my grandmother in 1905, she was a servant girl to a fairly wealthy fella, right? And she took him to court for a month's pay. And she lost, he won. And my daughter, I was telling my daughter, she said, how could she have lost? I said, it's simple. He was somebody, she was nobody. But she was also a very, very ardent Republican, very strong Republican. Her brother was a quartermaster in the IRA in Waterford City here, both in the War of Independence, and he took the Republican side during the Civil War. But she was also very proud of a family tradition that they were involved in 1798. I do know on the Power side, on my grandmother's side, Power, that her family were evicted in 1826 because they voted for Catholic emancipation. They voted for Villiers Stewart, who was kind of, even though he was a Protestant, he was pro-Catholic emancipation. So Ollie, I have all that running through my veins. There's not much I could do about it. But so I wasn't aware of all that at that time, but I did have a sense of justice and injustice.
And you were talking about the kind of like the young radicals coming out of the 60s in the glass factory. You know, like all we say the Shammies and the Walters and all the rest of us. Like, would you think that was kind of influenced by what was going on in the world in the 60s?
Exactly. And everybody was being radicalised at the time. You know, you had Vietnam, you had the north of Ireland, you had everything, and people just began to view things differently, you know. And all this young fellas, we thought there was a better way than all this trouble, you know. And as I said, even though we might have preached revolution, and we certainly didn't practice it. We practiced moderation in the factory. I mean, the fact I eventually, as I said, I don't know if I said it earlier, I began shop steward courses out in the canteen. Che O'Neill, Che was one of the lads came out. Sean Maher, you know, Sean, and Matty Bulger came out. A lot of lads came out, and you know, they done in their own lives, they done reasonably well. But we showed them how to, if there was a problem, how to take the grievance and move it forward without having to stop. So it was beneficial. We eventually ended up, and the company so sensitive of giving us our own office. Now, when I went for branch chairman first, I wasn't qualified. I was still an apprentice. And so at that time, as I said, the branch chairman's function was merely to put up a poster about a branch meeting coming up. And that was it. That was the sole function. And when I took over the job, and I got so many votes at the time, huge portion of the vote in the glass factory. And Dixie Power turned to me and said, a vote for change, Dermot, he said. He said, you're going to have to change things. I didn't know what he meant by that. But I did know what I wanted to do was to have a more cohesive group of shop stewards in the factory. And eventually I began to go around and talk to people. I go up to the brew room, I talk to the shopsters up there and the workers up there. Go into the cutting shop, I go into the general section, and I began to speak to people. And I got called in by personnel because of my union time. Why was I spending so much union time? And Dixie came in to me and he said to the personnel, different times, he said, different people. This is what you have now, he said. This is the future. And like I said, always so supportive. Now, Dixie wasn't a member of Socialist Workers Movement or anything like that, or either was Shawnee Cuddy, but by God, they were absolutely brilliant trade unionists. Absolutely brilliant. So that was it. So we eventually went from that, from being called in to the office for spending too much union time, to having my own office, myself and the senior steward. And, you know.
How did that work? Because, I mean, wasn't it voluntary up to a certain point, and then at some point then it became more of a formal job?
Yeah, it did become a formal job, as I say, and it was good, and it was good for the company because, you know, you were going around. Now, I always remember a time when one of the young fellas said, and stop me enough, I said it before, Ollie, that he would say, we're going on strike. I remember Tommy Hogan said to him, if you want to go on strike, he said, but remember this, you'll always go back for less than you went out for. And that was very, very true. So it was the art of negotiation that everyone was learning. And this was a brilliant learning process. So much so that I think it could have been the late Anthony Brophy said to me that Griffin, the one thing that amazed Griffin is, where did all ye fellas get your education from? I went in, I was in there at 16 and a half in the class. All the fellas was in at 15, you know what I mean? No education. But it was, and you were quite right about the times and the times around the world, the 60s, people were beginning to view things differently. You know, people were beginning to educate themselves through reading an awful lot, you know. And that was it. But yeah, it was, I'm very proud of the fact that I was on the union in the factory at that time.
And who would be, like, for example, I mean, I know you talked about the two lads, the older lads, but like among your own group, who were the educators of ye? Like,
well, there was one guy that came in, his name was Seamus Garrity. Seamus was brilliant. Now, he was absolutely brilliant. A lovely fella, a great educator. So I would say Seamus Garrity kind of sat us down and said, this is it, lad. He gave us sort of a political grounding, if you want to put it that way, you know. And I thought he was absolutely brilliant guy. And we kind of took it off from there. And our aim was, other factories, if they wanted to get a window open out on the estate or someplace like that, they'd have to call the branch representative to come in to get the window open. We were the opposite. We didn't want a branch official in the glass factory. There was no need for him. And indeed, for a lot of the time, the only function he had was to come along to a meeting, a branch meeting, and he would take the notes of the meeting. And that was the way we wanted to see the union operating in. And we also ensured that when people came in from doing any work, that there were members of a union. And we went around inspecting, some believe, we went around inspecting cards of workers who came into the factory. You know, subcontractors had to be a member of the union. And we negotiated that with the management, you know, and they were okay with it, you know. We were what we were, and they were what they were, you know. And but it was I would never ever fault the workers for anything in Waterford Glass.
And speaking of the workers, because I mean, there was a fair bit of, I suppose, resentment in Waterford in ways, because people say, oh geez, they're very well paid out there and blah blah blah. But at the same time, there was a great there was a great support by the workers for all local charities and all that. Like, so do you want to just tell us a little bit about that then?
Well, regarding the generosity of the Waterford Glass workers, it was legendary, and it was genuine, because no matter who came along, for whatever reason, they were supported. We had a thing in the factory, a system called payroll deductions, and I'm sure that many the shop in Waterford became millionaires out of the payroll deductions. It was stopped. There was one guy who worked with me, he had 5 wage packets. His money was in one, and there was another 4 stapled onto the original one, that making it 5, with the printout of all the stoppages in his money. So he was, if we wanted a pair of shoes, we were paying somebody something every week for shoes. We were paying somebody something for suits. So you didn't have to, you could walk down to any of the shops and say, I want to get a suit. And these were all tailor-made suits, And so Waterford did very well out of Waterford Crystal. Any charity. I have a photograph there of myself, Tommy Allen and Jimmy Sullivan. Tommy Allen was from the Blowing Room, Jimmy Sullivan was from the Electrician Union, and we given £100 to St Vincent de Paul. It was non-stop, and I think unfortunately a lot of the people involved now are now dead, but I can tell you that their generosity knew no bounds, and for that alone the glass factory should be remembered.
And what about the animosity thing that I mentioned? Like, there was a bit of kind of thing where, probably because people were getting paid so little in other places.
Exactly, and Waterford Crystal was spend, right? Spends, and that was the philosophy. If you wanted to go on a holiday, you got a loan off the bank, despite the fact. But Ollie, at that time, you must remember, there was music in Waterford 7 nights a week, and there was cover charges in pubs, and everybody paid it. And it's unfortunate, and that people did when they were on strike. I'm glad they're getting the comeuppance. I was in the shop there last year. This is true, and I wasn't involved. I was only in. I was standing. I was waiting in line to be served, and this fellow was in front of me, and I thought he knew me, and he was taking the piss out of me, and blackguarding me, and he was saying, that's wrong. The workers in the glass factory, it was wrong that they earned so much money. But I discovered then that he was serious, and he talking to the other guy in the shopkeeper. And I said, do you not realise, I said, that the glass factory workers were on piece rate, I said, I worked there, I said. He didn't know me, but he was talking about the glass factory. I said, that was damn hard work, I said, you went in on a Monday morning with no wages, nothing in your pocket. You had to pick up a glass and cut it, or pick up molten glass and blow it. And that was your wages. That was the only money you had. So you had to work hard to get good wages. Oh, no, he said, I don't mean it like that, he said. But most of those fellas, he said, had no education, he said. And it's not right that people with no education should be allowed to earn that much money. I said, you got to be... I said, you have to be joking. I thought he was joking, but he wasn't. So I just turned on my heat and I walked out. Because that's the type of animosity. Now, this was from a businessman. This wasn't just a bloke, but you're quite right in saying, yes, probably, you nearly call it a natural resentment, that we had so much, we were driving good cars. I always had new cars and all that, and people did resent it, I'm sure, but what can you say,
But also, the glass factory workers were famous for supporting causes.
Very much so.
Like, I'm talking about political causes.
Yes, very much so. And particularly when the miners' strike. Now, I think the miners' strike, I left in 1982 after serving almost 20 years I served in the factory. And the reason I left the factory was this. I came up with an idea of repairing Waterford glass, right? So supposing, I have one here, so supposing there was a little chip out of the glass here, right? Or a crack, say a crack down to there. You cut it like this and that, make a V shape in it. Then you leave it go, put another V here, leave it go for another bit, put another V here. So you reshape the glass and you have a unique piece of Waterford glass, so you don't have to throw it out. And I went up to Galway Crystal, I bought 5 machines, spindles of whole machines, and I bought maybe 30 or 40 wheels, all different types of wheels. And I asked the company, could I have 3 weeks, along with my 3 weeks holidays, to go to America to, look about setting up a company over in America, because I thought that's where it was. And I was called into the personnel department, and I was told that, no, you can't have it, there's have to be in a meeting. And I said, a meeting about me? Oh, no, he said, a meeting in general. But I said, there's people getting months off, there's people getting 2 months off. I said, like, what's the difference? I'm only looking for 3 weeks, I said, along with my 3 weeks holidays. No. And I said the wrong thing. Well, I said, you can shove your job up your arse. And I walked out of the office and I walked down to the shop steward in the flat cutting, and I said to him, I'm going to give you one piece of advice. I said, go and look for as many modifications as you can in the section. Because I said, there will come a time when they'll take those modifications and they'll shove them up your arse. And my words rang true, because it came along, they brought in the cutting, all the different automatic molds, they brought in all these modifications, and I'm not sure how much the workers actually got for it. But I knew at that time that changes were on the way. Management changes and changes for the workers. And I think I was prophetic in my advice to that particular shop steward, you know, that there would come a time that I was shoved up their arses. And
so you wanted to set up your own enterprise?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And
yeah.
they didn't give you the go ahead?
No, but they did it themselves.
Good.
They eventually set up a similar type of business in America.
Wow.
Yeah, and they set it themselves. Ollie, I can tell you something. When I went, I was told at that meeting that I had with the personnel man, right, about not giving me the time off. And I said, well, they can shove the jobs up their arse. And he said to me, don't leave, Dermot, he said. You will never. Now, this was advisory. This wasn't threatening, right? And I have to say it about the man. I was get on very well with that personnel man. He said to me, you will never work in Waterford again, Dermot. And he was right. I never got a job. I left Waterford Glass in 1982. I never got a job from that day to this. Now, I worked at the music, as you know. I got a couple of stints in WLR. I worked on a FOSS scheme. And as a matter of fact, when the FOSS schemes started at the beginning, I couldn't get on one of them. And the man told me, I knew the man, he told me, Dermot, he said, did I want you on it in case you'd organise the workers? And I didn't get on a FOSS scheme at that time, but I eventually did get on a FOSS scheme, which I worked in the library. And he was right, I did organise the workers. So, how can I say, old habits die hard.
Are you basically saying that there was the word was out that certain fellas
not certain fellas, any Waterford Glass worker. You see, we achieved our ideal at the beginning, and that was to educate the workforce in Waterford Glass, to give them a sense of political awareness, to give them a sense of their own worth, that these were very valuable workers and their labour value was very high, and to always respect that and to look for the best conditions. And it was just simple. It wasn't trying to form socialism all around the world, even though that's what we taught theoretically and all that. But as I said, we practiced moderation. But I believe we did achieve that. And one particular member of management, after the strike in the 90s, when all these redundancies happened, he told me that he was told, and you know the man I'm talking about, I don't want to say his name on camera, and he told me that the only reason he got a job was that he had been on management. And the word was out, do not employ anybody from Waterford Glass, because they're all radicals. Now, they weren't all radicals, but they would have been highly politicised and highly aware, and they would have been good trade unionists. They would have looked for their rights in that. And so, historically, was that a good thing we achieved or a bad thing? I don't know. But I know I personally never got one job since 1982. So, I'm 72 now, so I'm after lasting. I didn't starve, you know.
And then obviously the other thing then is thrown back at people is that that radical side of the union was the cause of his downfall. You know what I mean? This is the propaganda.
Yeah, I understand that. Now, in the 80s, there was a guy in Business and Finance. He wrote an article, Waterford Glass, Prisoner of the Left. He had an awful lot of things wrong. As a matter of fact, I'll show you when the interview is over. I was doing a reply. I decided to keep it for a later time, like now, when we can look at it historically. But almost all the assumptions that he came to in his article were wrong. Okay, there were socialists in it. There were young fellas selling the worker and all that. But as I said, and I say it again, preach revolution, practice moderation, you know. And that's what happened. But under no certainty, but what I can say definite is that the management ruined Waterford Glass. And that has been proven. Now, I wrote, when 2009 came, I wrote an article in the Munster Express called How Will History Judge the Demise of Waterford Crystal? That appeared in the Munster Express. My good friend Martin Hearn wrote a book which was published only recently. Now, Martin was the only man who could write that book. He's both an academic, He's an ex-glass factory worker, cutter, and he looked at it and was extremely fair in it. But I don't think I'll wrong him by saying that the conclusion he came to was exactly the same conclusion that I've come to, that the management were a disaster in the factory. Ollie, when you came in that time, something I just, from some of my files, and this is 2005, when Waterford Glass was gasping for its last breath in 2005. And 7 executives in Waterford Wedgwood pocketed 10.2 million in salaries and bonuses, while close to 2,000 staff got the axe worldwide, including 500 people in Waterford. Their pay and bonuses for the last financial year was more than double the previous year's 4.2 million. And on it went, and it lists all the people who got the money. And the group had lost 161 million last year, and 500 workers in the 2 Waterford Crystal plants lost their jobs. That's the type of money was being taken by senior management out of Waterford Glass. It was a disaster. I told you, Ollie, at Christmas, my partner got out glasses. She had some friends coming. And I said to her, God's sake, I said, where'd you get them glasses? Down in Michael Guiney's. And now, not to say there's anything wrong with Guiney's, but they looked as if they were a very budget type of glass. And she said, they're Waterford Glass. Go way out of it. I said, there's no way they're Waterford Glass. And she brought out the box. And it was the first time that I'd seen these. I said, oh my God, is this what it has come to? Is this what it has come to? And if I say the word, Ollie, absolute shite. Now, another example is that I was buying a present years ago. My brother was a master cutter in Waterford Glass too, Nicholas. And I went down to meet him down at the showrooms. And he said to me, what about the John Rocha? And I said, what's that? I had been in England at the time. And he brought me over and showed me, and I burst out laughing. I said, you've got to be joking me. Why is it? He said, they're flying off the shelf. I said, do you see those glasses? I said, that's the coat we put on a glass when we were sharpening wheels in a flat cutting, I said, just to make sure that the wheel was smooth and there was no lines in it. Now, this was a marketing ploy, right, by the company. And this was the most sought after Waterford Crystal, but they poured millions into making it the most sought after. And if I can give you an example of how easy that is. When I was playing in England in the band, right, and an English millionaire fell in love with the band, he wanted us to be famous. So he flew one of the top Irish promoters from Ireland over to meet us in England along with him, right, in a pub down in Fulham Broadway called the Rosine Dove. And we met him there. So this manager came in, this English millionaire, put his hand in his pocket, took it out and said to your man, this is where my mouth is, threw his checkbook on the table and said, I want these guys to be stars. How much will it cost? And he said, 100 grand. He said, 100 grand. He said, I could make a scabby cat a star for 100 grand. Well, where do we go from here? He said. Well, anyway, that's a different story for another time. And so it didn't happen anyway. But that's what it took. That's what it took to make Daniel O'Donnell a big star. 100 grand. He became a big star. So they were pumping money into that brand. But in the end, John Rocha, 10 John Rocha glasses, plus a holiday you could get in America for $100. So all that glitters is not gold, you know. And they were giving Sarah Ferguson, the wife of Prince Andrew, £500,000 English pounds a year to speak about Waterford Glass. There was no end to the money that they spent. They had loads of money, but in my opinion, no brains. And I mean that sincerely. I don't think they had a single brain cell among the lot of them, you know.
And what would you like to see in the end? I mean, like, you know, obviously things went belly up and blah, blah, and there was the decision and all that kind of stuff. I mean, what would you like to see?
Well, I remember I was up on the green with Harry Russell, my friend. Harry was also a pot filler in the glass factory, and we were walking the dogs, and some fella ran over and said, Waterford Glass, WLR after announcing that they want all ex-Waterford Glass workers to go down to the showrooms, that they're after being locked out. So myself and Harry brought back the dogs, and we ran down to there, and we stayed there. And now, I know a lot of people were afraid. A lot of people were older. The place was closing down. Some fellas had come out on their pensions. Everything at that stage was up for grabs, so to speak. Everything was gone. Factory was closed. Fellas didn't know where the next wage. And I think, to a great degree, an element of panic set in. What I would like to see happen, and if I had been there, I would have voted and insisted that the workers took over the factory. Now, people would say, but how could you do that? There were so many workers. It would have to be sorted out. But for me, I would have taken all that glass to ensure that the workers were being paid. I would have went down to the Cork Road and would have put up a saying, water for crystal for sale. I would have sold all that stuff instead of leaving it being taken away. And I would have taken over the factory. And that's the difference, Ollie, between where ideology and leadership comes in. You know, there's some people who are brilliant for ideology, but that's where you need leaders to go out in the front and to take that brave move and say, hold on a second, lads, we're taking this place over. And take it over and run it. And I tell you why, would it work? Well, it worked in 1923 in the gasworks in Waterford, when the workers in the clerical stack took over the gasworks. The gasworks, how important was it? It supplied the whole town, industries, shops, houses with gas. The whole Waterford couldn't function without the gas workers, right? They took it over and they ran it successfully for 6 weeks. They ran it too successfully because they ran it so successfully the government sent in the Free State Army to close it down. And the same could have happened, but you needed that leadership. Now, the lads in 1923 had a hell of a lot, because when you weren't working, you were in dire straits. In dire straits. And I think that's what would have happened. If I had been there, I would have advocated, let's take it over. Let's run it ourselves. They eventually did run it, and they're making profit down there. So I think that's what they gave up. But having said that, I'm delighted I worked there. I made some great friends, still have great friends, and I loved the bones of every bit of it down there, particularly all the workers, you know. And that's it.
And Dermot, would you finish with a song? Because we never got you on camera with a song.
Well, I'll do a song for you, Ollie, but this is nothing to do with the glass factory. And you know, Jimmy Sullivan, who was a neighbour from Newport Said, and my cousin, seemingly they used to get me. They used to say they'd have nothing to do. Come on, we go up and get the little fella to sing. And they used to come up to Dial Street and they used to put me up on the table. Now, I don't remember this. This only Jimmy Sullivan told me. And they used to have the crack with me. They'd have me up, and I'd be up on the table in the kitchen and I'd be singing. I said, what would I be singing, Jimmy? Oh, he said, you'd be singing everything, he said. Songs of the day or whatever, he said. You were always singing. And yeah, it's just, I don't know where I got it out of it, you know.
And then when did you take up an instrument?
Well, I was at home one day, and it would have been the late 60s. And we had a shop in Dial Street. And my mother said, Dermot, there's a chap up in the shop wants you. And I went up and he had a guitar. And he said, I'm selling me a guitar. He said, you wouldn't interest in buying it. But I was already in a band at the time. Where I had been with Simon's Protege and that. And so I bought it off him. And I taught myself how to play it, you know. So you can see all these guitars and banjo and mandolin. I can play all them. I'm not great on them, but, you know, knock a tune out of them, you know. And that's just for pleasure, you know.
And the music side, in a sense, has stood to you all your life, hasn't it?
Well, Ollie, as I said, failing that, and even when I was in the glass factory, I played music. But failing that, I would have been in dire straits. As I said, you know, I always managed to pay the rent or whatever, all through the music, you know.
Okay, give us a track there you were going to do.
How would you sing that? I can't remember the start of that. Only our rivers run free. I start with the chorus. Oh, where are you now when we need you? And what burns? Oh, sorry, Ollie. Can I start why I'm singing that song?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to mention too about Bernadette Devlin, that picture as well.
Yeah.
Because that's a great picture.
Yeah.
It's with yourself, Walter, and
Declan Chasty.
Declan, sorry, and Michael O'Brien, is it?
Michael O'Brien. Well, Ollie, regarding, as I said, my family was a very Republican family. And the first song I ever remember being sung was by my grandmother. And she used to always sing it, Down by the Glenside, a Republican song. I think it was written by Pat Carney, I think the words of it, an old Irish tune. And, but yeah, I was brought up by my grandmother, and she actually reared me, even though my mother and father, we all lived in one house, but my grandmother more or less kind of captured me because we all lived in one house, and I was her little boy. And she was all the time talking about Republican things and singing Republican songs, and I would be very Republican, still am, and that's why when the H Block, I was honoured to be able to be part of it, H Block committee at the time, and I was chairman of it. And there's a lovely photograph that you mentioned earlier on of myself, Declan Chasty, Michael O'Brien from the Irish Transport Union, and Bernadette Devlin, as she was at the time, down on the Mall. And I was looking for more information on the newspapers. There was very little about it, and probably the times that were in it. But yeah, I was very, very honoured, and I got a lovely letter from Kevin Lynch, the hunger striker who stood for Waterford. I have a beautiful letter. She sent me down a memory card belonging to Kevin Lynch, and a beautiful letter thanking me for, you know, for supporting him at the time. So it's a nice thing to have. I still have it and I treasure it, you know. I'll eventually probably give it down to the Waterford Treasures or something like that, or some type of museum, because it's no good to me, but it is nice to have. But yeah, and the song I'm going to sing, Ollie, I said when I was only a young fella, Bernie Coakley was married to my cousin, and he was involved in Sinn Féin, and I eventually joined Sinn Féin back in the early 60s. But we all decided to go up to Lismore Castle and hold what was called a fishing. We all had our fishing rods with us. And the reason we were doing that was the fact that despite the fact that we're free states since 1922 and a republic since 1949, that certain Anglo-Irish gentry around the country still owned the rights to the rivers, the fishing rights of the rivers. And indeed, the Duke of Devonshire owns not only the right 20 miles of a stretch of the Blackwater from Lismore down to Youghal Harbour, but he also owns the river. He also owns the harbour in Youghal Harbour. And if the Youghal Council want to put out moorings in the harbour, they have to seek permission from him. That's, you know, it's crazy. Well, we went up anyway with our fishing rods, and we were lined up at the ditch, and the guards were down the field with their batons ready to give us a little scalp if we ran down. But by God, we did run down, and we had a symbolic cast of our fishing rods into the river. And it was a great day out and a great crack, and I'm delighted I did it. And I'd do it again in the morning if anyone's come up that way. Oh, where are you now when we need you? And what burns where the flame used to be? Have you gone like the snows of last winter, and still only our rivers run free? Oh, how sweet is life, but we're crying, and how mellow the wine, but we're dry, and how fragrant the rose, but it's dying, and how gentle the wind, but it's sighing. What good is in youth when it's aging? And what joys are in eyes that can't see? When there's sorrow and sunshine and flowers, and still only our rivers run free. Oh, where are you now when like the snows of last winter, and still only our rivers run free, and still only our rivers run free. But unfortunately, they still don't run free. Thank you, Ollie. That guitar was only €250.
It's gorgeous sound.
Oh my God. Now, Paul Grant came up. You know Paul, the guitarist? He played it. Please don't tell me, he said, it was any less than €1,000. I said, Paul, €250.
Wow.
He said, oh, fuck off now. He said, stop. He said, I have guitars, it's 5, 6, 7 grand at home. He said, they're not as good as that. Just looking. John Palmer's.